there you are reading a post from a complete stranger on the internet, and they start telling your story, like the whole thing. And it has it all: the love bombing, the confusion, the apologies that came with strings attached. This literal stranger even seems to know the exact words the narcissist used to reel you back in. And at first you think there is no way, but then it happens again and again. And that's when it hits you. It wasn't personal at all. It was a pattern. So if you've been trying to figure out what's still keeping you stuck after a relationship like that, I made a quiz that can help. It's designed to help you spot the specific dynamic your system might still be caught in, so you can get clear on what's actually going on and finally move forward. There's a link for that below. My name is Christina, and after my own aha moment where I learned my story wasn't as unique as I thought, I realized the pattern meant more than I'd ever given it credit for. Sometimes the clearest way to understand just how confusing these dynamics can be is by looking at the most extreme example. So let's do that through the story of a woman who actually lived this. Elizabeth Kendall was in a relationship with Ted Bundy for years. And no, your ex probably wasn't a serial killer, but the emotional pattern Elizabeth describes in her memoir in some ways mirrors what thousands of survivors have shared. So when Elizabeth and Ted first met, he was kind, attentive, and curious about her life. He made her feel wanted and chosen, like he saw something special in her no one else had. And he quickly folded himself into her world. He would cook her dinner, buy her flowers, and even took care of her daughter. He became like an instant part of the family. And that is love bombing right there. But over time, things began to change. Elizabeth noticed that her boyfriend became distant and emotionally unavailable. He would disappear without any explanation and then show up again with a casual smile, like nothing had happened. And when she asked questions, he was evasive, vague, and dismissive. But he was also just reassuring enough to make her question herself instead of questioning him. And that's the devaluation phase. It's the part where the pedestal they had previously put you on starts to wobble, but you can't quite explain why. Elizabeth knew in her heart something wasn't right. But there was still just enough affection sprinkled in to keep her hoping. But one day in 1974, Elizabeth finally saw a police sketch on the news that looked just like this guy who was once the love of her life. And the pieces started coming together, even though a huge part of her was fighting to believe it couldn't be real. But thankfully, she was grounded enough not to defend him. But she didn't exactly trust herself either. And even after everything came out, even after his confessions, she later wrote that she still felt lingering shame about having loved him. So maybe your story didn't make headlines, and maybe no one else even ever knew what was happening behind closed doors. But if you were pulled in by the version of someone who seemed perfect, and then spent months or years trying to make sense of the chaos, or if you kept holding on because something in you still believed the person you met at the beginning was real, then at some point you've probably asked yourself the question that haunts almost everyone who's been through this. Why do they all act the same? How is it that people from completely different backgrounds, cultures, and upbringings can follow the exact same emotional script? And listen, I'm not entirely ruling out demonic possession, but today we're going to explore a more grounded explanation, one that has everything to do with what they need at each stage and what they're willing to do to get it. So let's talk about why they all follow the same emotional script. You see, narcissists, they don't all sound the same and act the same because they're all copying each other, even though it may seem like there's a literal playbook out there somewhere. They actually follow the same script because underneath the surface, they're chasing the same core needs, which are validation, control, admiration, and power. And depending on the phase of the relationship, those needs show up differently. So their behavior shifts depending on the phase you're in. But the motive behind it stays the same. So first, let's talk about the idealization phase. And at first, the need is simple. They want to feel special. That's why they come in so strong and they mirror your values, talk about the future, and say things like, I've never felt this way before. It feels very personal, and this is where so many survivors end up saying they feel seen like never before. But at its core, it's not about making you feel seen. That is not their goal. It's really about who the narcissist gets to be when they're with you. In Elizabeth Kendall's story, Ted made himself indispensable. He cooked meals, took care of her daughter, and acted like a family man. And I'd imagine that's exactly what she was looking for. And he knew it. Later, she described the beginning of their relationship as loving and supportive, like she'd finally found a safe partner. Now, in hindsight, thinking of Ted Bundy as a safe partner must bring up all sorts of feelings for her. But I'm sure that so many of you can relate, although on maybe a different scale. When the relationship is over, it's common to question yourself and kind of have that what was I thinking moment. How did this even happen? How is this real life? But you believe it so strongly in those early days. And that's what makes this phase, the love bombing phase, so powerful. You bond deeply and quickly to someone who's performing a connection, not building one. And that's the other piece of the pattern that shows up almost every time. The connection forms at lightning speed. So you go from strangers to so-called soulmates overnight. And in the moment, it feels like fate. But what's really happening is something much more calculated, even if they don't realize exactly what they're doing. Narcissists have a deep need to secure emotional supply. And the faster they build the bond, the faster they can anchor you into the version of themselves they want you to see. And while most relationships are about building trust, it's quite the opposite with a narcissist. For a narcissist, this phase is actually about bypassing that trust. Because the sooner you feel invested, the harder it is to question what comes next. And that's why so many survivors look back and say, I knew it was fast, but it felt so real. And it did feel real because your feelings were genuine. Theirs were strategic. But that intensity can never last. Once the excitement fades, or you start showing up as a full person with your own needs and boundaries, things are going to change. And suddenly, without realizing it, you've entered the next phase of the pattern, which is devaluation. So one of the hardest parts about this phase is what it makes you question about yourself. Because in the beginning, they adored you and made you feel like you were everything they'd ever wanted. And then it changed. And it didn't happen overnight, but the change was definitely there. And it's so easy to think, maybe, just maybe, once they got to know the real me, they just didn't like what they saw. But that's not what's happening behind the scenes. You see, if that were the case, if this were a healthy relationship with a partner who was capable of having a healthy relationship, if they didn't like what they saw, maybe at first they would address it, and eventually, before too long, they'd probably end the relationship. But a narcissist will absolutely stay and torture you because this is how every relationship goes with them. So this is just part of the natural process. They will stick around for as long as it serves them. They will stick around for as long as they can maintain control, and then until they can secure supply. And again, if it were a healthy relationship, getting to know someone more deeply creates more connection, not less. But narcissists, they just don't bond that way. And what it all comes down to is they weren't bonding with the real you. They were bonding with an image, one that reflected exactly what they wanted to see. So when you started showing up as a full person, not just a mirror, the illusion cracked. And they started looking for ways to put you back in the role they created. And that's when the subtle digs start. You might notice some withdrawal and a whole lot of emotional whiplash. And all of this is designed to destabilize you so they can stay in control. And inevitably, this all ends in what we call the discard phase. So this can be confusing because a lot of people do end up staying with narcissists for a long time. And you might be left wondering, well, when does this discard phase come? Well, the truth is it comes over and over again within the relationship, but you just can't see it from the outside. It's when they come completely withdraw when they stop treating the person with respect and they start treating them with a whole lot of contempt. And essentially that means that they believe they're better than that person and they're tired of hiding it. And so they'll go through those phases and then kind of pull out of them. So in a long-term relationship with a narcissist, you'll notice a lot of that back and forth. All right, so whether it is an obvious discard or not, no matter how long you saw it coming, it still blindsides you. And even if things have been strained for a while, even if you've been slowly detaching, you're still not prepared for how abruptly it ends. And the reason they give often makes no sense. You could have shared something about yourself on day one, something they claim to accept or even admire. But now, suddenly, that exact thing is a deal breaker. And you're left standing there wondering how a 10-year relationship could unravel over something they've always known about you. But this isn't about logic. It's about convenience. Narcissists don't exit because they've worked through their feelings. They exit because the role you were playing for them, whether that was caretaker, cheerleader, audience, or emotional punching bag, which it usually ends up there, that role has stopped feeling useful for them. And once that role stops working, they need a reason to walk away that makes them look like the victim. So they manufacture one. And then comes the part that makes so many survivors question everything. The side of them that shows up during this phase is not just cold, it's almost unrecognizable. So you thought you'd seen them at their worst before, maybe during arguments or moments of cruelty. But the version that ghosts you, smears you, and seems to feel nothing while you are absolutely falling apart, that's the one that leaves you wondering if you ever really knew them at all. And if that weren't enough, they often make sure you see how happy they are without you. So this is when you'll see the social media love story and the comments designed to land like knives. And while it looks like they've moved on easily, the truth is they have to. Narcissists can't be alone, not for long. They absolutely need an audience. They need a mirror, someone to reflect back whatever version of themselves they're trying to hold on to next. But the public performance, let's be real, it serves another purpose too. It lets them rewrite the story, so they're not the problem, you are. And if they can spin that version loud enough and look happy enough doing it, it gives them power, or at least the illusion of it. But behind all that, they haven't resolved anything. They've just reset the cycle with someone new. And when that gets old for them, that's when you may encounter the hoovering phase. So this doesn't happen with everyone. Not everyone gets hoovered. Not every narcissist hoovers even. But so many of them do that it is worth mentioning. And if you're with a narcissist who does hoover, that is a cycle that will repeat over and over again, typically, until you've finally had enough. Till you get fed up and say no more. So you may or may not have experienced this one from the playbook, but if you do, it usually happens right when you're starting to feel a little bit more clear. So out of nowhere, they pop back up. And sometimes it's framed as closure. So maybe just give me 5 minutes, or just one conversation, just one chance to explain. And other times it's a full-on apology that feels urgent, desperate, and even emotional. And it probably sounds very real. And they might even believe it themselves. But it's not coming from a place of clarity. It's not coming from a place of missing you or self-reflection. Where it's really coming from is that they can feel you slipping away. And they can see that you're seeing them differently. So they're losing some control. And rather than sitting with that, they try to pull you back in. And that can look like the accidental text or a nostalgic photo they send to you. Maybe it's a birthday message that comes wrapped in a nice, warm, fuzzy sentiment, but somehow still makes you feel responsible for their pain. And none of it is random. It's all part of a pattern that we see play out over and over again with narcissists. And this pattern is designed to reopen the door just long enough for the cycle to reset. And if you've been conditioned to hope for closure, or to believe the version of them you met at the start was actually real, all of this is really hard to ignore. But if it is really closure they wanted, they wouldn't need to access you again. So what they want isn't peace, it's proximity. And when somebody's primary motivation is to regain access, not to repair or rebuild, you're not looking at growth here. You're looking at another entry point to the same cycle. So now let's talk about what this really means. If all of this that we're talking about today felt a little too familiar, that's not a coincidence. Narcissists don't all follow a script because they all think the same way. They follow a script because their needs are the same. And again, that is control, validation, power, and attention. And let's face it, their emotional tools are very limited. So they reach for the same tactics again and again in different packaging. So if you found yourself asking, how did I not see it? How was this person able to do these things to someone they claimed to love? Was it all a lie? Just know those questions aren't signs of weakness on your part. They're signs that you were trying to make sense of something designed to keep you confused. But now you're seeing the cycle. And that's the first step out of it. So the details of every relationship are different. But the pattern is the part that's almost always the same. We saw it in Elizabeth's story, how the charm gave way to confusion and how the person she trusted slowly became unrecognizable. And if you felt that same unraveling, if you've asked yourself how someone could change so completely, it's not because you missed something. It's because these relationships follow a kind of emotional playbook. And we're tempted to think it's because all narcissists are possessed by the same demon, but it's actually because they're all driven by the same desperate need for control, admiration, and emotional supply, no matter what it costs the people around them. So they rely on the tactics that work. They rely on the love bombing, the gaslighting, the blame shifting and silent treatments, even the smear campaigns. And over time, you start to realize it's not personal, it's just a pattern. But of course, that awareness doesn't mean that your feelings just disappear. You might still miss them. You might still feel pulled toward the version of them you met in the beginning, even if you now know it wasn't real. But I also want you to know that it's just part of your conditioning and you can work your way out of it. But if you're still feeling that push-pull, I did make a video that breaks down exactly why that happens and how to start letting go without beating yourself up. And that should pop up right around here somewhere. But before you go, be sure to like this video if you haven't already, and I'll see you again soon.